Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a soggy, sepia-toned corner of colonial history right under the wide, dripping canopy of something you probably didn't know could be taxed, the humble umbrella. You're standing in a packed, puddle-filled market square in 19th century Calcutta. Your sandals are soaked. The rain is falling sideways. Traders are yelling over one another about mangoes and turmeric, and cows saunter by as if the storm is a stage production put on for their benefit. In the middle of it all, a sea of umbrellas, some tattered and mended, others regal and embroidered bobs. Like mushrooms growing from the heads of every soul in the crowd. You spot a man with 3 boys trailing behind, all of them dry under a huge indigo parasol stitched with tiny golden elephants. Just beside him, a rice vendor shields herself with palm leaves, eyes darting nervously toward a government inspector known to fine vendors for non-compliant shade devices. You think you're just here for a stroll, but the umbrella above. Your head might say otherwise. You probably won't survive this, honestly. Between the paper stamping clerks, the 17-step permit application for rain protection, and the unspoken social rules about how high to hold your umbrella, it's not just damp, it's complicated. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere rainy or dry, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past a chai stall where steam curls up lazily like incense and settle beneath a weathered awning with a distant view of the post office. From here, you can watch the monsoon blur the world into watercolor. Umbrellas pop open like stage cues. A small boy in wet cotton tries to sell you one for a few annas. Its wooden handle wrapped in string, the canopy stitched from 2 different saris. You decline, not unkindly. After all, you already paid the tax on yours. And the colonial cities of India, Calcutta, Madras, Bombay umbrellas weren't just practical. They were declarations. To hold one aloft meant something. It meant you had status, or at least pretended you did. Local tradition had long held umbrellas as emblems of dignity, especially in places like Kerala, where kings were identified by their ceremonial parasols as much as by their thrones. When the British arrived, they didn't ignore this symbolism. They inflated it. Suddenly, umbrellas were no longer just functional. They were civilized, modern, British. A dry head became a sign of progress, which, as you might guess, meant someone had to start regulating them. You remember the classic colonial move: find a tradition, decide it needs permits, then charge people for doing what they'd always done. Historians still argue whether the first umbrella taxes emerged as formal tariff laws or informal municipal fees. Either way, by the mid-1800s, certain cities began treating umbrellas like luxury items. In Calcutta, shopkeepers who sold imported umbrellas had to register each shipment with the tax office. Buyers received stamp tags, not unlike modern clothing labels, which were to remain tied to the umbrella's handle on pain of penalty. Lose the tag, lose your shade. You imagine walking through the bazaar with a fraying label flapping on your handle, like some sad colonial bookmark. But to cut it off was to risk being stopped by a constable who might ask where your umbrella's proof of duty was. It's all very official and all very silly. It wasn't just the British who upheld these codes, though. Indian elites often enforced them too. A Maharaja might scold a servant for showing up with the wrong umbrella on the wrong day. This is for garden walks, he might sigh, not palace meetings. And yes, of course, there were umbrella inspectors. At least 2 documented positions in Madras and Lahore were dedicated entirely to verifying the tax status and suitability of fabric on high-end umbrellas. Their job, essentially, Judge a stranger's rain gear. You duck into a cloth shop to escape another downpour. Inside, bolts of silk, cotton, and wool lean against the walls, stacked like logs for a very fancy fire. A man shows you parasol fabrics that are tax-friendly and others that might raise an eyebrow at the customs office. He whispers like he's selling state secrets, but all you want is something that won't collapse in the next gust. At some point during the late 1800s, umbrella taxation became more standardized. Rates were based on handle material, bamboo, wood, horn, and canopy fabric, cotton, waxed canvas, imported English twill. There were excise tables, printed guides, even a brief period when umbrella repair services had to submit monthly logs of refurbished models, lest the government miss out on the tax for restored shade goods. You let your mind wander back to the boy with his sari-stitched umbrella. Was it taxed? Probably not. But would anyone enforce that in the chaos of the bazaar? Depends. If you wandered too close to the civil lines, where British officers strolled with lace parasols and silver-capped canes, he might attract the wrong kind of attention. And speaking of lace parasols, don't worry, we'll get to those. Ladies, eventually. Right now, you just watch the rain bead on your borrowed umbrella and roll off in gentle arcs. The sound is hypnotic, almost like a lullaby composed by the monsoon itself. A cow shakes its head, annoyed by the droplets tickling its ears. Somewhere behind you, a vendor mutters about taxes that make the sky expensive. You can't help but smile. In this moment, the idea of taxing the very object that shields you from the sky feels both absurd and inevitable. Colonialism, after all, had a way of commodifying the weather. The umbrella you're holding is plain, but sturdy dark cotton stretched over thin ribs of brass with a wooden shaft that has been smoothed by many hands before yours. You carry it with just enough pride to fit in, but not so much that you'll draw attention. Because in colonial India, umbrellas do far more than keep your head dry. They speak for you. And today, in this damp and bustling city, that little roof over your head says something about your rank, your wallet, and whether or not you're behaving Britishly enough. You step past a policeman standing under a portico, his boots muddy and his umbrella regulation issue. He eyes you, squints at your handle, and then goes back to sipping from a clay cup of chai. He's not really worried about you, you're no trouble. But the thought still lingers. Was your umbrella imported or made locally? Are you carrying a parasol or a rain shade? Did you pay the city license fee on it? And most importantly, do you look like the sort of person who would? Umbrellas in colonial India weren't just taxed, they were tiered. And not in the way a child might imagine, with umbrellas sorted by color or size. No, these were deeply hierarchical. A silk canopy on a turned sandalwood stick? That was officer class. A cotton umbrella with bamboo ribs and local dye? Probably fine for a school teacher or clerk. A hand-woven palm frond parasol? Technically functional but laughably unregistered. By the mid-1800s, colonial rule was as much about managing optics as it was about managing infrastructure. British officials, after noting that Indian nobility traditionally used ornate umbrellas as ceremonial items, leaned into the symbolism. The umbrella became a badge of status and a soft signal of where one belonged in the social spectrum sort. Of like wearing a tailored blazer in a room full of wrinkled hoodies. And so, regulations followed. Not just tariffs on imports, but rules about umbrella display. Some municipal codes dictated that only certain classes of people could open umbrellas, while in the presence of high-ranking officials. In parts of Madras, local ordinances briefly suggested that the height at which one held their umbrella might need to correspond to their social class, though historians still argue whether this was ever enforced seriously or just another bit. of colonial satire turned regulation. You pass a couple walking quietly under a shared shade. Hers, frilled with cream-colored lace, is just wide enough to keep her dry. You smile at their care. But a shopkeeper nearby mutters about the lace. Imported, he says, almost reverently. Liverpool lace. Taxed at 2 rupees the yard. Shows on the receipt. And there's the crux of it. Umbrella taxation wasn't just about revenue, it was about receipts. Paper trails, proof of participation. Every taxed umbrella came with documentation. Sometimes a stamp affixed to the handle. Sometimes a paper tag tied to the shaft. Sometimes a ledger entry in a government book that probably still sits, forgotten, in a dusty colonial archive. You can imagine the conversations. Sir, I can't allow this parasol at the club without visible tax verification. But it was a gift. Then I trust the gifter followed Municipal Code 47B. It wasn't all bureaucracy, though. There was style, particularly among those trying to keep up with British trends. In Calcutta, umbrella fashion became a thing. Patterns and colors were debated in tea salons. Tailors began offering custom umbrella covers to match one's shoes or sari. One lady even commissioned an umbrella to match the peacocks in her garden. It folded awkwardly and barely opened, but it was a conversation piece. Still, for every ornate parasol carried down the polished paths of colonial clubs, there were hundreds of humble umbrellas doing their duty in the real rain. Wicker-handled, frayed at the edges, borrowed from neighbors, and most definitely untaxed. These, the umbrellas of rickshaw pullers, vegetable hawkers, schoolboys, and widows, moved silently through the downpour. Legal or not, no one could really enforce taxes in the slums and villages, and even the most zealous inspector knew better than to chase after unpaid umbrella dues in the back alleys of the city, which leads to one of the more amusing, scholarly debates. Did the British Raj even collect meaningful revenue from these taxes? Some argue the entire system was more symbolic than profitable, a performative act of empire that said, "We regulate even the sky." Others believe the revenue funded road drainage projects in specific quarters of Calcutta and Bombay, though no clear records survive. One archived letter mentions shade tax revenues being insufficient to support planned sidewalk expansions, which suggests that yes, someone somewhere thought umbrella fees could pave the streets. You hop a puddle and step into a shaded lane, where old iron gutters overflow and orange marigolds float by like little sunbursts on a watery river. In the distance, a railway porter walks with 2 umbrellas balanced on his shoulder like yokes. He'll sell one before sunset, probably for twice its listed price tax included or not. Meanwhile, the symbolism of the umbrella continues to expand. For colonials, it's about control and civility. For Indians, it's adaptation. A borrowed icon of power, repurposed for both weather and wit. One clever pamphlet from the 1880s even used an umbrella metaphor to explain colonial taxation at large. It is a wide cloth held over the people, but when the rain begins, the cloth is taken by the few. You stop at a street vendor who sells sugarcane juice under a black oilskin canopy. He offers you a small glass for half an anna. You sip. It's sweet, earthy, cold-soothing. He points to your umbrella and asks, "Bombay make?" You nod. He shrugs approvingly. Taxed? He grins. You raise an eyebrow. I'll never tell. The rain slows to a gentle patter now, more like fingers tapping softly on the silk skin of your umbrella. You wander farther into the city's colonial heart, where the buildings get taller. The signage shifts from Bengali to English, and the umbrellas start to carry a sharper sense of authority. Here, even the dogs seem to walk more politely, weaving between boots and sandals with diplomatic restraint. You pass a gate painted the color of old tea, flanked by guards in crisp uniforms and polished brass buttons. Above the entrance, a faded wooden sign reads, East India Company Records Office. You know what this place means. Not excitement, not danger. Just endless paper. You duck inside. The ceiling is high, fans whir slowly, and clerks shuffle by in quiet pairs, balancing stacks of parchment on wooden trays. The room smells like dust, ink, and a hint of rain-soaked wool. A sign directs you to the Municipal Customs and Civic Goods Department, where umbrella records are tucked between salt imports and opium license renewals. You imagine the scene back when the British first arrived, not in fleets and finery, but gradually through ink and rules. The East India Company didn't just conquer through conquest. It conquered through columns, shipments tallied, weights recorded, local goods taxed, and symbols like umbrellas folded into the fabric of colonial life. One such record, reportedly dated 1828, outlines an early version of an umbrella code. All imported umbrellas to be taxed at 4 annas per item. Domestically made umbrellas taxed at 2 annas unless manufactured with imported fabric. British officials are exempt. Indian nobility may apply for partial exemption under Ceremonial Use Clause 18A. Ceremonial Use Clause 18A, you smirk. Even in the realm of rainshade, bureaucracy has found a way to define the sacred from the secular. It wasn't just the regulation, though it was the enforcement. The colonial administration dispatched umbrella patrols in large cities. These weren't armed squads, mind you, but more like damply disinterested clerks with lists, riding in carts, peering out into the rain to spot illegal umbrellas. Their job: determine whether each umbrella was of taxable material and had the proper ribbon, tag, or stamp visible from a reasonable distance. One man's job, in fact, was solely to compare handles. If it bends, he reportedly wrote, it's bamboo, probably native, possibly evading duty. Of course, none of this enforcement worked particularly well. Indians, creative and accustomed to colonial absurdities, found ways around the rules. Umbrella sharing became popular not out of affection, but because if 2 people held the same umbrella, only one might be fined. Shops began producing detachable handles, allowing taxed and untaxed parts to be swapped with ease. Children were sent out to scout the streets. When a tax officer was nearby, they'd run ahead, yelling tax rain, like weather prophets of mischief. Historians still argue whether these tactics formed a true resistance movement or just a series of small, everyday acts of rebellion. Either way, you feel it. The low-key genius of subverting bureaucracy with wit and weather. And then there were the rules around umbrella behavior. In the 1840s, a pamphlet circulated in Madras titled Proper Etiquette for Gentlemen During Monsoon Months. It included detailed instructions on how to carry an umbrella while bowing, when to lower one's umbrella in respect to a superior's, the recommended distance between umbrellas when walking in formation, 3 feet, to avoid tangling. Brief but deeply serious section on umbrella duels, where jabs with pointed ends were to be discouraged. You walk by a row of coat hooks in the records office, each with a numbered slot. Above them, a sign reads, Umbrellas may be registered but not stored overnight. A bored-looking clerk scratches his ear and motions for you to move along, muttering something about foreigners always asking about old tax ledgers. You smile politely and slip back outside. The rain has slowed to a mist now, soft as powdered sugar. In the clearing drizzle, the colonial buildings take on a paler glow ivory facade softened by moisture and time. You spot an old sign on a rusted pole. City License Office. Umbrella certificates and import duties formerly active. The building is abandoned, of course. A goat stands on its steps, nibbling on what was once probably a proclamation about proper parasol registration. Your umbrella, meanwhile, has begun to squeak faintly with each step. A reminder that even tax-worthy objects age. You tilt it slightly and the world tilts with its shopkeepers pulling back their awnings. A policeman slipping on the cobblestones, two lovers sharing a lace canopy and a very small samosa, and all. Around you, the rules of the British Raj still echo softly now, like the fading heartbeat of a bureaucracy that tried to tame the rain. The rain picks up again, as if cued by some invisible stagehand who prefers you not get too comfortable. The droplets come faster now, clapping gently on rooftops and gathering in the folds of your umbrella. You quicken your pace down a narrow lane, passing shuttered storefronts and muddy courtyards, until a flicker of lamplight and a distinct smell of wet paper draw you toward the tax office annex. Inside, it's a different world, dim, quiet, and entirely devoted to the curious business of umbrella documentation. There's a man behind a desk with an ink-stained finger and spectacles the size of chutney jars. He's surrounded by piles of scrolls, registers, and perhaps most absurdly, an actual physical box labeled "Lost Tags, Umbrellas, Assorted." He doesn't look up as you enter. Instead, he continues filling out forms, muttering softly about handle curvature and stitch count. This is where it all begins. The act of transforming rain protection into a taxable luxury. The early umbrella tariffs were not particularly harsh in value, but they were monumental in meaning. When the British colonials decided to treat umbrellas as semi-luxury imports, they simultaneously carved a line between who should be protected from rain and who simply got wet. Imported umbrellas, usually from England, were taxed more heavily. They arrived by ship, often bundled with sewing machines and soap, and were inspected at customs with a seriousness usually reserved for liquor or rifles. Their fabric was fine, tightly woven silk or waxed canvas, and their handles were polished horn or even silver-plated. Owning one meant you were either rich, lucky, or well-connected. Sometimes all three. Locally made umbrellas, by contrast, were simpler. Bamboo shafts, cotton canopies dyed with indigo or turmeric, and handles shaped by village craftsmen with hands stained from years of work. These were more than tools. They were culture, passed from monsoon to monsoon, patched lovingly with old saris or jute bags. But even these were taxed, albeit at a lower rate. Because the principle wasn't fairness, it was record-keeping. The man behind the desk pauses. He lifts a tag from his lost box and squints at it like a jeweler inspecting a flawed gem. Model 5B, Lahore handle, British canvas. Issued 1887. Stamp faded. He sighs. Shame. He places it gently in a folder as if tucking in a sleeping child. You find yourself staring at the shelves. Each one groans under the weight of ledgers, labeled year by year, 1872, 1873, 1874. On and on. Within them lie the scribbles of hundreds of civil servants, some of whom spent entire careers managing nothing more than the import and sale of umbrellas. In one ledger, you find a curious entry. July 14, 1882. Shipment of 47 umbrellas. Detained at port. Reason: handles excessively ornate. Officer deemed them socially inappropriate for common use. You read it twice. Ornate handles banned for common use. Imagine that. A handle too fancy for a regular citizen. Historians still argue whether this reflects an attempt to prevent social climbing or merely a confusion over style guidelines. And the bureaucracy didn't stop at shipping. Once umbrellas reached the city markets, shopkeepers were required to log each sale. Buyers received a small paper certificate like a miniature passport for their ranger. Lose it, and you were technically in violation of city code. Some shops responded with unexpected ingenuity. They began sewing tiny cloth versions of the certificates into the umbrella lining. Others printed tags that doubled as advertising. Day Brothers. Rain shields, taxed and trusted since 1857. One enterprising merchant even offered free tax tags for umbrellas purchased during festival season, earning him a reputation as either a saint or a swindler, depending on whom you asked. You turned to find a corkboard mounted on the back wall. Pinned to it are real examples of these old tax tags, brittle, tea-colored scraps bearing the British crest and stamped with phrases like "inspected for duty," Class A, compliant shaft, or the more mysterious "token valid until flood season." It's tempting to laugh, but also a little sad. This isn't just red tape. It's a blueprint for how empire trickled into everyday life. One umbrella, one stamp. One soggy citizen at a time. And of course, there were exemptions. British officers and civil servants were not only free from umbrella taxes, they were sometimes issued umbrellas directly by the company itself. Regulation issue parasols bore initials or engraved clasps. They weren't just permitted, they were flaunted. A sort of monsoon military medal bobbing above a proud colonial mustache. Meanwhile, Indian merchants and professionals lawyers, teachers, editors were expected to comply fully. And heaven help the poor man who owned a British-made umbrella without a receipt. Inspectors were known to confiscate umbrellas mid-rain. In one recorded case, a schoolmaster had his parasol taken during a thunderstorm only to be handed a warning. Slip soaked into illegibility by the time he reached home. You leave the annex and step back into the drizzle, where umbrellas bloom again like sleepy flowers. It strikes you how personal they are, each one a small fortress against the sky, a portable roof over a single story. And in colonial India, those stories were shaped quite literally by fabric and feet. The road beneath your feet squelches with mud and forgotten monsoon puddles, and you walk with the care of someone who's seen one too many sandals claimed by sticky Calcutta gutters. The rain is steady now, less of a shower, more of a mood, and your umbrella creaks as it shields you from the warm droplets. Up ahead, you see the dull red walls of a small government outpost. Painted on the door, almost illegible through the water streaks, is a fading sign. Division of Umbrella Inspections and Paperwork Processing. You can't resist. Inside, it smells of mildew, wax sealant, and someone's forgotten tiffin. Alone. Clerk, hunched over a desk piled with forms, looks up with the weary expression of a man who's explained the same process 17,000 times and has exactly 17,000 more to go. Lost your tag? He asks flatly. You shake your head. He seems disappointed. Well, if it's not that, I suppose you're here for grade classification. And just like that, you're drawn into a side of the colonial umbrella story most never see. The utterly pointless and somehow magnificent world of grading umbrellas. In theory, the grading system made sense to the British administration. It helped them determine how much tax to charge based on material, function, and perceived value. But in practice, it became an elaborate and wildly inconsistent system that involved subjective judgments and more than a few sly bribes. There were 3 official grades. Grade A, imported, luxury umbrellas often with carved or metallic handles, and fine canopies. Grade B, functional umbrellas made with approved materials locally. Grade C, native varieties, often handmade and deemed inferior, regardless of actual quality. But unofficially, a whole spectrum emerged, what the clerks called umbrella personalities. Was the fabric shiny enough? Did it snap open with enough vigor? Did it smell too strongly of cow dung repellent? These things mattered. One inspector famously downgraded a merchant's umbrella from B to C because it opened too sluggishly for civic pride. You take a seat and watch as a clerk calls in the next umbrella owner. A middle-aged man with a briefcase in one hand and a large checked umbrella in the other. The inspection begins. Handle? Teak, wrapped in cotton thread. Weight? Roughly 750 grams, sir. Stitch count on canopy? 34, evenly spaced. But notice this slight fray here, the clerk tuts. Just above the fourth spoke. Technically repair, which makes it B-. The man groans. But sir, I paid the grade fee. Did you submit form R7B? With the umbrella diagram? I wasn't told. That's the wrong ink. That's fountain. Umbrella diagrams require dip pen submission. You sit frozen, somewhere between awe and hilarity. Historians still argue whether these grading systems were enforced with consistency across regions. In Bombay, records show the inspectors being far more lenient, often waving people through with a wink and a sweet. In Madras, however, the grading officers were considered strict but fair, reportedly consulting fabric merchants and weavers during evaluations. The true absurdity came with the paperwork. If you wanted to appeal your umbrella's tax grade, you had to submit not one, but 3 copies of your complaint. One for the Civic Goods Department, one for the Office of Textile Standards, and one rather incredibly for the Department of Foreign Ornamentation. This last one existed purely because imported umbrellas often came with decorative flourishes that needed independent assessment. You recall one archival letter from a clerk in 1879 that reads, "A man came with an umbrella beaded with small glass animals. I have no training for this. I sent him to Mr. Chatterjee, who knows birds. It is possibly a heron, but I will not guess." And if you think this all sounds ripe for corruption, well, of course it was. Many umbrella owners avoided these headaches entirely by greasing the right palms. A discreet rupee under a form, a well-timed box of lattice during Diwali suddenly. Your umbrella was upgraded and the stamp affixed without so much as a glance. Entire neighborhoods knew which clerks were friendly with the rain. One lesser-known form of bribery involved tea. A family in Allahabad reportedly kept a special blend of Darjeeling they only served to inspectors. Inspector tea, they called it, subtly infused with cardamom and approval. Still, most citizens played by the rules or tried to, especially the middle class. Teachers, postmen, junior clerks, they would arrive, rain or shine, to queue for inspections. Children would hold umbrellas high, mimicking their parents, learning the rules of shade and social order. It was strange, even charming in its way. Bureaucracy as bedtime routine. You exit the outpost into a world slightly mistier than before. The street glistens like a stage. A small girl sells roasted peanuts under a plastic tarp. She's covered, not by an umbrella, but by an old tablecloth pinned to a broomstick. No taxes here. Just practical ingenuity. The irony, of course, is that none of these inspections ever stopped people from getting wet. They merely made dryness official. And the forms, oh, the forms. You've seen enough to dream about them. Triplicate requests. For single umbrellas, declarations of umbrella intentions, even a line item for anticipated canopy tilt under gale conditions. Still, you're grateful for your little dome of cotton and brass. Graded or not, it's doing the job. The rain ticks along the surface, a lullaby in rivulets. And you wonder, in a world where the weather was free, how strange it is to charge for shelter from it. You follow a bend in the road where the buildings drop away and the landscape opens into soggy fields edged with coconut palms. There's no grand transition here, just a blur of city becoming countryside, umbrellas becoming palm leaves again. It's quieter out here. Even the rain seems to pause and think before falling. You pass a cart loaded with clay pots and a family sheltering under a single red umbrella that might have been inherited from someone long forgotten. Out here, the umbrella is not a tax document. It's a tool, a hand-me-down, a woven piece of weather armor passed between brothers, neighbors, and farmers. And this, as it turns out, is where resistance began, not with riots or speeches, but with the steady ingenuity of rural craftspeople. In the villages dotting Bengal, Gujarat, and Kerala, people began making their own umbrellas, not as acts of open rebellion, but as practical solutions to a ridiculous problem. If the government insisted on taxing umbrellas with metal tips, foreign cloth, or shaped wood handles, then why not make them out of whatever wasn't on the list? You come across an old man sitting under a banyan tree, mending an umbrella with twine and what looks like a bit of coconut husk. He looks up, eyes twinkling beneath the dripping leaves. Rain comes, umbrella stays. Tax goes, he says, chuckling at his own wisdom. Villagers would craft umbrellas from bamboo frames, stitched together with jute thread and covered in banana leaves, cotton scraps, or even waxed paper. Some designs looked like festival decorations. Others resembled large, tragic butterflies. But they worked more or less, and more importantly, they bypassed the tax. Historians still argue whether the British ever formally classified these village-made umbrellas as taxable. Officially, the regulations often ignored non-standard construction or temporary canopies. But that ambiguity worked in the villagers' favor. Inspectors were rare in the countryside, and those who did make the trip often left baffled by what they found. One inspection report from 1891 reads, "Came upon a market with 78 umbrellas. Only 2 could be clearly identified as tax compliant. One had a goat horn handle, the other was a bird cage. A bird cage." You can't help but imagine some clever soul repurposing a busted cage as a canopy support. You picture the rain bouncing off the metal in cheerful plinks while a parrot somewhere watches in dismay. What emerged was less an organized movement than a quiet revolution of adaptation. In Kerala, entire families became known for their rain flowers, a local name for the makeshift umbrellas stitched from old temple banners and sari cloth. In Bengal, potters sold tiny clay weights meant to anchor umbrella bases during storms, doubling as prayer candle holders when dry. Innovation grew not from protest, but from inconvenience. Yet the government took notice. By the 1880s, some district officers tried to enforce tax rules in the villages. They issued blanket mandates. All umbrellas of visible permanence must be declared, and sent junior inspectors into the monsoon slick fields. Those inspectors did not last long. One diary entry from a frustrated officer tells the story. "I questioned a man about his umbrella. He claimed it was a fishing net strung between 2 sticks. I confiscated it. He returned with another, made of clay and covered in wax paper. It disintegrated in the rain. I gave up." Back in the present, you pass a roadside shack where a family is eating jackfruit and passing around a cloth umbrella as they talk. One corner of the canopy is held up with a twig. Another has a patch stitched from what looks like old postage stamps. No 2 ribs are alike. It looks like an umbrella assembled by a committee of poets. And yet it's beautiful. The resilience here is not loud. It doesn't make speeches or fly flags. It just finds the cracks and grows through them like weeds, in stone. And while the cities fought over lace trim and certificate ink colors, the countryside simply carried on. People didn't pay the tax, not because they were radicals, but because they couldn't afford to be. And so they found another way, not rebellion, not submission. Just a third path, creative avoidance. This quiet defiance echoes still in the way people here build shade from saris, in the mismatched patchwork that dots the markets, in every unlicensed umbrella still keeping someone dry. And maybe, just maybe, in the story you're listening to now, you re-enter the city by a quieter road, one of those sleepy back lanes where the drain water trickles past chai stalls, and everything seems a little out of step with time. Here, the rain isn't a performance. It's just something that happens. While people wait for dosa batter to rise or for a telegram to arrive, you turn the corner, and a man in a wool vest nods at you as he hauls open a heavy wooden door marked with a curious sign: Municipal Evidence Storage, Umbrella Infractions. And contraband, retired. Your ears perk up. Contraband umbrellas? You step inside. It's dim and dust-choked, with bundles wrapped in old canvas and shelves sagging under boxes marked MISC, Confiscated Rain Goods, 1894 to 1912. A retired constable in a creaky chair glances at you and shrugs. People think opium, gold, rifles, he mutters. But no. You know what we really found? Umbrellas. Hundreds of them. This was the world of umbrella smuggling, a strange, slow-moving underworld that flourished not with drama, but with quiet absurdity. In the cities, where the tax was actually enforced, many turned to less than legal ways of getting dry without getting fined. At first, it was small things, a missed stamp here, a shaved-down handle there. But soon enough, a whole industry emerged around the smuggling and resale of umbrellas. You picture it, a man stepping off a train in Bombay, carrying 3 umbrellas nested into each other like Russian dolls. He's got a receipt for one, the other 2? Family heirlooms, he says, with a wink, or the tailor's apprentice who takes your measurements, then leans in close. Need an umbrella? No stamp, no fuss. Comes with a free shoulder strap. Smugglers became creative. Some disguised umbrellas as curtain rods. Others labeled them as ceremonial sticks or religious fans. One even passed through customs with a shipment labeled hollowed mango decorations. Inside, 8 parasols, all neatly packed and dry as bone. Historians still debate whether this constituted a true black market or just a chaotic gray one. The transactions were usually quiet, polite. No whispers in alleyways or secret knocks. Just a subtle nod, a folded slip of paper, and maybe a complimentary cloth cover. One particularly colorful figure, a shopkeeper, known only as Monsoon Uncle, ran an entire side business renting umbrellas for single use during stormy seasons. He avoided taxes entirely by never technically selling anything. You'd borrow a canopy for a small deposit, and he'd even throw in a sweet lime candy if you promised to return it dry. Of course, law enforcement tried to intervene. Umbrella checkpoints were set up in key city squares during the thick of the monsoon. Officers stood with soggy boots and even soggier tempers, stopping passers-by and demanding proof of taxation. But umbrellas aren't easy to regulate. They're everywhere, constantly moving, passed between strangers or hung on cafe hooks. One moment, it's yours. The next, it's in someone else's hand, repurposed as a clothesline or a cricket bat. Inspectors sometimes resorted to sting operations. In one infamous case, a constable disguised himself as a beggar with a broken umbrella. The hope was to catch a smuggler offering to upgrade him. Instead, someone offered him tea and walked away. The operation was deemed a gentle failure. Still, punishments did exist. Fines were common especially for repeat offenders, or those carrying clearly foreign umbrellas without tags. Confiscation was more public and more embarrassing. Imagine losing your umbrella mid-monsoon, handed a soggy piece of paper with the words, "Held pending verification." One teacher from Lucknow wrote bitterly in his diary, "Lost my umbrella today to a junior officer who claimed the brass cap was too European. Was drenched by the time I reached school." Students laughed. "I taught with a towel on my head. You." Pass another shelf in the evidence room. where confiscated umbrellas lean like forgotten soldiers, some torn, some elegant, all caught in the tangle of empire and weather. And beyond enforcement, there were consequences of a more social kind. You might be whispered about if seen with an unlicensed umbrella. Some housing societies, particularly those managed by British landlords, required proof of umbrella tax compliance before allowing tenants to hang them in shared spaces. A man in Calcutta reportedly had his umbrella removed from a club rack and mailed back with a fine and a note. "Do not darken our foyer with illicit shade." But even the most rule-abiding citizens knew ways to stretch the system. Some purchased second-hand umbrellas, ones with tags still attached, carefully preserved like old postage stamps. Others wrapped their untaxed canopies in cloth covers bearing imitation seals. The government, always a step behind, eventually made it illegal to own a cloth umbrella. Bag without tax documentation. You shake your head and leave the storage room. Stepping out into the street again, where real umbrellas float above crowds like colorful jellyfish. There. A small boy runs past you with a bundle of umbrellas strapped to his back. He's humming, not selling, just moving, perhaps delivering stock for a stall, or returning borrowed ones to Monsoon Uncle. Either way, he disappears into the drizzle like a phantom of the smuggling circuit, his step soft and fast and never in one place for too long. And as the rain falls again, you wonder, how could something so simple, so ordinary, become the center of such a curious, soggy cat and mouse? It starts with a single complaint, handwritten, slightly damp, and delivered in a folded envelope that smells faintly of turmeric and irritation. "I paid for my umbrella stamp," the letter insists. "Now they say I need another one because the first was applied at an angle." You're reading from the copy posted in the foyer of a faded courthouse in Allahabad. The clerk who pinned it up is long gone, but the note remains brittle with age and surrounded by the ghosts of other complaints, scribbled petitions, urgent requests, and one oddly poetic appeal involving a goat, a monsoon, and a missing receipt. This was the other face of umbrella taxation, not the elite drama of parasol smugglers or the clever resistance of rural artisans, but the truly bewildering, mind-numbing confusion of regular people trying to stay dry and legal. Welcome to the courthouse. Confusion. You're seated on a wooden bench, the kind that creaks in protest if you so much as exhale. Beside you, a school teacher freshly scolded and still damp clutches a red and yellow umbrella like it might explode. "It's the second time," he mutters. "Last week they fined me for having no tag. Today they say it's the wrong tag. I've only ever had one umbrella, and it was a gift." He's not alone. The list of umbrella-related grievances grew so comically long in the 1880s that some colonial courts had to introduce special dockets for civic shade disputes. One judge famously presided over 17 consecutive umbrella cases in a single day. By the end, he declared that no man should be made to suffer twice for staying dry. Historians still argue whether these cases were sincere attempts at order or a convenient distraction from more pressing civil unrest. But they happened and were meticulously recorded. Take the infamous Das v. Municipal Board case of 1886. Mr. Das, a modest grocer, was fined for public deployment of an umbrella of foreign manufacture lacking visible permit. He appealed, producing the receipt, a slightly torn strip of blue paper, still faintly legible. Unfortunately, the tax officer insisted that the receipt only applied to single-user umbrellas, while Das's had a shaft wide enough to shelter two. Dual sheltering without dual licensing, he declared. The court proceedings went on for days. Witnesses were called to confirm whether the umbrella had ever shaded more than one person. At one point, an actual demonstration was held outside, where a constable and a constable's nephew attempted to huddle under the canopy while a clerk took measurements with a piece of string. Eventually, the court ruled in Das's favor, but only after he agreed to downsize his umbrella handle and add a visible solo use stamp. The case made the local papers, sparking weeks of letters from other irate umbrella owners. You lean against a courtroom pillar now, watching a file clerk sort through a box marked 1890, miscellaneous rain accessory disputes. She pulls out a long document titled Complaint No 3042, Chutney-based v. Rajputana Civic Enforcement. The issue? Her umbrella had been dyed with a forbidden indigo blend reserved for military officers. "I like the color," she wrote. "It hides stains." The case was dismissed, but not before a municipal dye master was called in to testify that it wasn't just legality that caused problems. Protests cropped up across towns, not loud, not angry, just soggy. Picture rows of mild-mannered citizens standing in the rain outside a courthouse, holding umbrellas upside down in symbolic objection. Some wore tags around their necks that read, "Taxed, but still drenched." And in one particularly memorable episode, a printer named Gopal launched what may have been the quietest protest ever recorded. He reprinted old newspaper articles, except every instance of the word rain was replaced with heavily monetized sky fluid. His readership doubled. Still, the system didn't budge. Part of the absurdity was the paperwork itself. Filing an appeal against an umbrella tax fine required no fewer than 4 steps. A written explanation of your umbrella's origin and function. A sketch or diagram indicating handle design, canopy arc, and user capacity. A formal declaration of shade usage frequency, daily, ceremonial, or seasonal. A reference from a neighbor or employer affirming that, to the best of their knowledge, the umbrella was deployed in good faith. You lean back on the creaky bench and try not to laugh. Somewhere in this very courthouse, a man once submitted a defense claiming his umbrella was technically a mobile awning and therefore exempt. The judge disagreed, but gave him points for creativity. There was even a short-lived practice of issuing umbrella ID cards in Lucknow. These little tags came with the umbrella's serial number and a line for the owner's thumbprint. No one took them seriously except one particularly proud grandmother who laminated hers and wore it on a string like a pendant. And the longer you linger in this courthouse of damp dreams and bureaucratic bravado, the more you realize this wasn't just about money. It was about identity. If you owned an umbrella, you had a stake in the system. You were a participant in this strange colonial comedy of drizzle and documents. The teacher beside you is finally called in. He rises, straightens his kurta, and gives you a small smile. This time, I've brought the original receipt, the secondary copy, and just in case a letter from my aunt confirming I didn't buy it abroad. You nod solemnly. In a world where justice is measured in drops and drizzles, that might just be enough. It's not raining anymore, but the air still smells of wet stone and clove oil, and your umbrella drips faintly with each lazy swing. You find yourself wandering through one of Calcutta's older neighborhoods where the colonial architecture gives way to airy verandas, shuttered windows, and manicured hedges. The sun is peeking through, filtered by banyan trees and the scent of jasmine wafting from unseen balconies. This is the quieter side of the umbrella saga, the elegant, sun-dappled realm of lace parasols and fashion diplomacy. You're walking. In the footsteps of the British Mem-Sahibs, you hear the soft swish of skirts before you see them. 2 British women strolling slowly down the lane, each with a delicate parasol tilted just so. Their gloves are spotless, their posture upright. Their parasols? Embroidered, scalloped, and clearly not meant for rain. These are umbrellas in their most theatrical form, light, ornamental, and just transparent enough to suggest status. but never utility. In the British Raj, ladies' parasols weren't taxed as umbrellas, at least not at first. These lace-covered accessories were categorized as personal accessories, distinct from the working man's functional shade. But over time, even parasols came under scrutiny, especially as their size, decoration, and materials became increasingly elaborate. Some of these sunshades were imported from France or Austria. One even arrived with tiny silver bells sewn into the trim, which jingled gently as the lady twirled it. You can imagine the municipal clerk's headache trying to determine if bells were taxable. Are these handles or decorations? He might have wondered aloud, pen hovering uncertainly above a customs form. Historians still debate whether parasols functioned as status symbols or just expensive sunblockers. Some say they were tools of social separation, delicate shields that announced wealth, whiteness, and a certain colonial aloofness. Others argue they became tools of subversion as Indian women began to adapt, and transform them into fashion statements of their own. You spot a tailor shop tucked into a corner, its wide window filled with fabric swatches and a sun-faded sign. Basu & Sons, ladies' accessories and shade customization since 1869. You peek inside. Bolts of lace, satin, and fine cotton fill every shelf. There are canopy templates hanging like laundry on a festival line, one shaped like a lotus, another with scalloped edges and a tiny silk peacock stitched in the center. The tailor emerges from the back, pushing up his spectacles and smiling. Ah, you are browsing parasol covers? Imported, domestic, monsoon-resistant, sun-only, we do everything. He pulls out a catalog, the pages crackling with sketches. On one, a parasol labeled Madras Tea Garden Model Tussar Silk, Gold Trim, Colonial Approved. On another, Rain Bypass Edition, Cotton-lined, Concealed Whalebone, Hidden Permit Pocket. Yes, you read that right. Hidden permit pockets. There was a brief trend in the 1890s among elite women, Indian and British, alike, of having discreet compartments sewn into parasol handles or linings. These could hold folded tax receipts, tiny letters, or even calling cards. A poetic merging of fashion and bureaucracy. And then, of course, there were the goats. Wait. Yes, goats. In certain rural estates and merchant homes, parasol fabrics were stored in goat sheds to protect them from monsoon mildew. Goat body heat, it turns out, offered low-cost climate control. One eccentric British lady even claimed the scent gave her sunshade a most intriguing rustic perfume. Her parasol was eventually banned from the Madras Club veranda. It wasn't just about fashion, it was theater. Parasol deployment followed an unspoken choreography. Twirl counterclockwise when seated. Never shade a man unless he is ill or engaged. Close the parasol before bowing. And absolutely do not swing it unless signaling disapproval at a slow waiter or dusty rickshaw. British etiquette books outline these behaviors in exhausting detail. One 1883 manual reads, "A lady's parasol must not eclipse the authority of her husband's umbrella. It may rest beside it, never above." You picture the debates these must have caused. Yet, in true colonial irony, the parasol soon became an object of fascination across cultures. Indian women, especially those from aristocratic or merchant families, began designing parasols with vibrant local fabrics, golden tassels, and mirrored embroidery. They made shade beautiful, and they didn't ask permission. Eventually, the British administration couldn't ignore the growing number of embellished, oversized, and hybrid umbrellas appearing across tea gardens, hill stations, and social clubs. So they created a new category, decorative shade implements. These were taxed separately, with inspection focusing on intended use, degree of permanence, and degree of opulence. Degree of opulence. You can almost hear the sigh of the clerk forced to measure the tassel length on someone's sunshade while mentally preparing an opulent score. But the Mem Sahibs, well, they took this as a challenge. Parasol competitions became a fixture at Colonial fairs. Ladies flaunted shade devices so elaborate they required special armrests. One woman in Shimla reportedly brought a parasol that doubled as a collapsible fan. Another had one stitched with the map of the empire. All very tasteful, said the paper, if mildly cartographic. And yes, there were whispers, especially when Indian ladies outshined their British counterparts. Too ornate, some sniffed. Too native, others murmured dot, but the sun didn't discriminate. And neither did the parasol dot now as you step. Back out onto the lane, you pass a teenage girl balancing 3 parasols on her shoulder. One is lopsided, one gleams like new. She adjusts them carefully as she walks into the afternoon light, her sari catching the breeze. Maybe she's returning them. Maybe she's on her way to deliver one for inspection. Or maybe she just enjoys walking beneath the weight of a fashion that once made clerks nervous and goats useful. You open your own umbrella again plain, but proud. And you keep walking, imagining tassels. You've made your way to the edges of a princely estate now, just outside the city. The path narrows, lined with flowering shrubs and the occasional stray peacock. The rain has dwindled to a lazy mist, the sort that drifts sideways more mood. Then weather. A wide archway welcomes you into the courtyard of an old Haveli estate house once owned by a minor Rajput prince. The place is quiet now, a little run down, but it hums with memory. Pigeons coo from the stone ledges. A caretaker sweeps the marble floor in patient loops. This is where you meet one of the most peculiar umbrella stories of the colonial era. He was known, with mild amusement and a little exasperation, as the self-taxing prince. Imagine this. While most subjects grumbled, resisted, or quietly evaded umbrella taxation, one man insisted no, demanded to be taxed at the highest possible rate. His Highness Raja Shivendra Singh of Bind, mid-level royalty with a taste for imported umbrellas and elaborate ceremony, had a passion for regulation. Not following it out, doing it. If an umbrella tax was 4 annas, he would ask to pay 6. If the standard canopy limit was 36 inches, he would commission 48 and write personal letters asking for a penalty surcharge. I am not a commoner, he once told a British magistrate, and my umbrella should never be mistaken for one. Historians still debate whether he was making a point about status, mocking the colonial system, or simply very fond of paperwork. Whatever the motive, his obsession created one of the most delightfully bureaucratic episodes in umbrella lore. Walk through his dusty sitting room now. Framed photographs show the prince holding various parasols under trees at ceremonies on horseback. In one image, he's holding 2 umbrellas, both visibly tagged and stamped, while a servant trails behind with an umbrella license register on a velvet cushion. The register survives. It is real, bound in red leather with gold lettering. It contains entries like umbrella number 14, imported from Manchester, silver handle. Tax voluntarily increased 33% to reflect status. Umbrella number 19, gifted by Maharani of Jaipur. Assessed at 6 annas, but rounded up to 10 by request. And then there's the famous umbrella number, 25. Known throughout the region for its absurd width, nearly 5 feet across, requiring 2 handlers and a special hook on the prince's carriage. It had dual tags, each sealed in wax. The British officials didn't quite know what to do with him. Some loved the prince's dedication, calling him a model citizen of imperial values. Others were deeply annoyed. One administrator's letter complains, His Highness creates paperwork where none is needed. We spent 3 weeks confirming a self-imposed luxury surcharge. He then insisted we restamp the permit with gold ink. But the prince wasn't finished. He proposed formally that a new umbrella category be added to the civic goods: manual, sovereign reign instruments. This category would include ceremonial umbrellas so elaborate they required storage sheds and accompaniment by trained staff. Naturally, he submitted 2 qualifying entries. One had embroidery done entirely in pearl. The other had a musical feature: tiny bells that chimed when opened, tuned to a minor raga. You can't help but chuckle at the mental image. A musical umbrella twinkling its way through the monsoon, while a clerk follows with a clipboard and a headache. Eventually, the British agreed to the new category, perhaps out of respect, perhaps just to stop the prince from sending more letters. And yet, his legacy wasn't just in extravagance. There was a strange, stubborn dignity to it all. The prince never used his status to avoid the tax. In fact, he flaunted it. He saw it not as a burden, but a badge. Even the rain, he once said, should know who is royal. Still, not everyone shared his enthusiasm. You walk through the estate's garden now, where an old gardener tends to hibiscus bush near a crumbling gazebo. He sees your umbrella and smiles. Are you royal too? He jokes. You shake your head. Just passing through. He chuckles. Well, good. We don't need more umbrella forms. Still haven't forgiven him for the canopy height logs. We had to measure shade angles for 2 seasons. You sit beneath a stone awning, the garden quiet except for birdsong and a gentle breeze rustling the trees. Overhead, clouds drift by in lazy groups. Somewhere far off, a storm threatens, but it hasn't found you yet. And as you rest there, you realize that the self-taxing prince wasn't just eccentric. He was a mirror reflecting the absurdity of empire with every embroidered umbrella. Whether mocking, mimicking, or just enjoying the theater of it all, he played the system like a monsoon symphony, one umbrella at a time. The path from the prince's estate curves back toward the city, where the streets buzz with energy again: rickshaw bells, the low chatter of vendors, and the ever-present slap of water on stone. The clouds are back now, darker and lazier, like they're thinking about raining but haven't quite decided. You pause at a shaded courtyard, where a group of schoolchildren huddle around a teacher who's balancing a stack of worn books and a very plain umbrella. Her voice is soft but firm, and every so often she lifts her umbrella and gestures like it's a chalk pointer. It's a small detail, but a perfect symbol. An umbrella, not just for shelter, but for expression, for purpose. For defiance even, because umbrellas weren't just taxed. They became tangled, quietly, in one of the biggest ideas to challenge the empire: civil disobedience. You make your way toward a dusty library tucked between 2 temples, where stacks of yellowed newspapers, pamphlets, and protest letters are bound together with string. This is where the quiet winds of revolution once stirred beneath canopies of cotton and wax. It started, as many things did, with salt. When Gandhi launched the Salt March in 1930, a 240-mile protest against the British monopoly on salt. He wasn't just targeting salt. He was unpicking the very logic of everyday control. If the empire could tax the sky's tears, why not the ocean's salt? Why not firewood or shade? Historians still debate whether Gandhi ever mentioned umbrellas directly in his speeches. Some say yes, citing notes from his travels. Others believe he simply inspired people to look at every ordinary item, every object touched by regulation, as a site of quiet rebellion. What's certain is this: umbrella tax resistance began to spread. In cities like Ahmedabad and Lucknow, shopkeepers began selling freedom umbrellas, handmade models, clearly marked with the phrase, "tax not paid by choice." They were cheap, rough, and entirely illegal. But people carried them anyway. You turn a page in the archive and find a letter from a textile worker in Surat. I carry my umbrella with no stamp. If they find me, I will pay it in rice husk. If they take it, I will share another. That's not rage. That's determination. One notable moment came during a small but symbolic procession in Patna. Protesters walked through the market holding umbrellas painted with slogans. Not angry slogans, just questions. Is rain only for the rich? Do clouds respect permits? Must I tag the sky? The police didn't know what to do. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It was just DAMP. And quietly defiant, you walk deeper into the library and discover a drawer labeled Miscellaneous Resistance Memorabilia Umbrella Related. Inside are photographs of umbrellas used in protests. One has British proof stenciled on the top. Another features a sketch of a salt shaker with a canopy over it. A third is simply black, but signed by over 200 villagers. And then there's the Gandhi story. No one can prove it happened, but it's become a kind of whispered legend that during a particularly heavy monsoon in 1933, Gandhi was offered an umbrella by a British officer while passing through a flooded road. He reportedly declined, saying, "Let the rain fall equally on us both." Did he mean the literal rain? Or the rain of laws, of burdens, of absurd controls? No one knows. But the story persists, passed from storyteller to storyteller like a folded canopy in the wind. You leave the library and step into the open again, where a young couple is sharing a patched umbrella. It's nothing fancy, just stitched cloth and a splintered handle, but it's held with care. You watch them cross the street, dodging puddles, arguing about where to find tea. And you wonder how many umbrellas moved silently through those years, not as symbols of protest, but as quiet declarations of choice. I won't pay for this. I don't need your permit. Let it rain. Not every act of resistance makes a headline. Some just make you wet. The clouds have loosened their grip again, and you stroll under a thick patch of sky that's half willing to open up. The wind picks up just slightly, teasing the edge of your umbrella, and you steady it with one hand. Up ahead, the street turns. Lively voices rising, bells jingling, laughter spilling from stalls under fabric awnings. You've stumbled into the bazaar district. Not the fancy colonial shops with European imports and solemn clerks in waistcoats, but the local heart of the city, where the air smells of fried gram flour, tamarind, and monsoon-dampened spices. Here, umbrella culture takes a different turn, less about duty, more about delight. And here's where things get, well, a bit whimsical. In the late 1920s, with the government still issuing fines and tags like confetti, some cities tried a new tactic: carrot instead of stick. If people wouldn't willingly register their umbrellas for taxation, perhaps they'd do so for perks. And so, believe it or not, umbrella clubs were born. Yes, clubs. You pass a faded signboard now, nailed to the side of a still operating general store. Raindrop umbrella circle, Est. 1931, shade with benefits. Inside, an elderly shopkeeper nods knowingly. He gestures to a dusty display case. Inside are what look like oversized coins, each bearing the silhouette of an open umbrella. These are umbrella tokens, once handed out to members of local umbrella clubs as proof of tax compliance and community. The clubs were part civic compliance, part loyalty program. If you registered your umbrella and paid the annual fee, you got a token. That token could be shown at participating businesses for small bonuses, a second cup of tea, priority seating during indoor performances, or most memorably a free spoonful of chutney at select food stalls. Yes, free chutney for umbrella holders. Historians still argue whether these programs were sincere attempts at building civic pride or just gimmicks to pad tax rolls. But they caught on. Some clubs held annual monsoon fairs where proud umbrella owners paraded their canopies through the streets like fashion models. Prizes were awarded for most elegant design, best rain sound dampening, and longest continuous use, a title won 4 years running by a man whose umbrella had a hole patched with postage stamps from Burma. You cross paths now with an old rickshaw driver who waves you toward his umbrella, rack built right into the back of his vehicle. He tells you, with a certain conspiratorial pride, that back in his youth he was a member of the Downpour Society, which awarded him a brass badge reading Official Keeper of Dry Heads, 1933. He still has it. You believe him instantly. Of course, not everyone approved of these clubs. More conservative municipal officers complained that offering chutney in exchange for registration undermined the gravity of civic taxation. One letter, preserved in a Pune archive, reads, "Citizens should not be bribed with condiments to obey the law." Still, the clubs thrived. In Madurai, one club offered umbrellas on rotation like a shared library. You check one out with your membership token, use it for a week, then return it in exchange for a different design. There were florals, stripes, even one covered in motivational poetry. It became a mild sensation. Others turned the tokens into wearable flair. Women embroidered them into saris. Children used them as game pieces. And yes, traders found ways to counterfeit them. The black market quickly adapted, producing imitation tokens stamped with frogs or umbrellas that opened upside down. One inspector famously shut down a counterfeit token printer after noticing a token that read, "Officially wet since 1890. You duck into a narrow alley where a street mural survives in faded paint. A grinning umbrella standing beside a bowl of pickles." The words underneath read, "Dry head, happy belly. Join today?" Absurd, certainly, but also kind of lovely. The clubs did more than incentivize tax compliance. They created a kind of shared identity, people proud of their umbrellas, of being part of something that wasn't just about rules but about ritual. They gave people a reason to care for their canopies, to decorate them, to laugh about them. One club newsletter from 1935 features a recipe for monsoon chutney, a haiku about drying umbrellas by firelight, and a cartoon of a tax officer trying to measure a canopy mid-gust. You picture it, a gust of wind, a spiraling umbrella, and a clerk chasing his paperwork through a street full of onion fritters. And even today, in certain neighborhoods, you can still find tiny metal tokens nailed above doorways, forgotten badges of a time when compliance came with flavor. You smile. It's the rare story in this soggy saga that feels untroubled. People taking something mildly ridiculous, umbrella taxation, and deciding to make it fun, festive, their own. Because in the end, what's an umbrella for, if not a bit of comfort in uncertain weather? The drizzle begins again, soft and intermittent, like someone up above can't quite make up their mind. You've grown used to the rhythm now, the gentle hush it brings, the way it slows the city to a dreamy shuffle. You tug your umbrella open, again with one practiced hand, and step into a quieter part of town. Here, at the edge of the old administrative quarter, stands a narrow house with blue shutters and a plaque so faded it's barely readable. But you know the address. Everyone researching umbrella history eventually finds themselves here. This was the home of Mr. Barun Mukherjee, a man who never worked in high office, never made the papers, and never once broke an umbrella regulation. And yet, by the time he died, he had collected over 3,000 umbrellas. You ring the bell out of habit, even though no one lives here now. A sleepy caretaker opens the gate and waves you in with a nod. "You've come for the umbrellas," he says. It's not a question. Inside, the rooms are dim and full of quiet echoes. The air smells of old cloth and cedar oil. Umbrellas are everywhere. hanging from rafters, lined in rows against the walls, bundled together in corners like bouquets left behind by very polite giants. They're not flashy. No pearl handles or lace canopies. Just umbrellas of every imaginable kind: monsoon shields from Madurai, palm leaf shades from Orissa, stitched cotton models from Assam, a whole row of faded British imports with neatly folded tax tags still tied to the handles. Some are bent. Some are barely holding together. But all have been logged, labeled, and gently preserved. The caretaker hands you a yellowed ledger. His logbook, he says. Inside, you find line after line of entries, each in Barun's precise handwriting. Umbrella number 204, acquired from widow. In Rajshahi, claimed it survived 5 floods. Handle cracked, tag intact. Umbrella number 777, school teacher's parasol, traded for geometry tutoring. Imported, faded, used in 1896 municipal protest. Umbrella number 2204, purchased at auction. Unknown. Origin. Possibly cursed, keeps falling off hook. Each umbrella had a story. But why collect them? Barun Mukherjee wasn't an eccentric noble or a fringe academic. He was a municipal scribe mid-level, overworked and deeply committed to writing things down. What began as a habit, filing umbrella receipts correctly, assisting in inspections, helping neighbors fill out registration forms, soon turned into curiosity. What do umbrellas say about us, he wondered. Not just about weather, but about control and dignity, and how we move through the world when it turns wet and difficult. So he started keeping the ones people threw away. He repaired them, tagged them, cleaned off the mold, and wrote their stories down. Eventually, people began bringing him their old umbrellas voluntarily. One college student wrote in a letter, "Uncle Barun, my grandfather carried this one in the Salt March. The canopy is gone, but please give it a home." And he did. He gave them all homes across every wall, from ceiling beams to cupboard drawers. Umbrellas with holes patched by love. Umbrellas confiscated and later returned. Umbrellas smuggled in with mango crates, shaded lovers, protected sacred texts, or were once mistaken for walking sticks. Historians still debate whether Barun's collection qualifies as a legitimate archive. Some say it's anecdotal, sentimental, too personal. Others insist it's a folk museum, a precious record of monsoon culture from the ground up. You pause at umbrella number 1399. It's small, made for a child, decorated with hand-painted fish. His notes read, "Traded from boy near the Ganga. Refused to sell unless I promise to keep it indoors forever." There's a softness to that. The caretaker leads you upstairs to the attic, where the roof leaks slightly but the air is still. Here, beneath beams strung with cobwebbed ribs and dusty canopies, is Barun's writing desk. A single umbrella rests atop it, weathered, quiet, unremarkable. This one was his, says the caretaker. Carried it every day. Refused to pay the luxury tax. Sighed, "If it gets me wet, it should be free." You don't know what stirs you more, the cluttered devotion of the place, or the realization that all this was built not out of protest, but quiet curiosity, a desire to notice, to keep record of things others forgot, tossed aside, or folded away. Barun never married, never traveled far. But in the pages of his ledgers and the handles he labeled, you see a whole world. A world of rule followers, rebels, lovers, leaky ceilings, stubborn tailors, and rice farmers with leaf canopies strapped to their backs. You leave the house gently, careful not to bump into any umbrellas on the way out. The sky above has darkened once more, but you feel oddly warm, carried, almost, by the weight of stories held in stitched fabric and bent brass. Barun once wrote, The monsoon does not remember who held a tag, only who shared the shade. The clouds are back in full now, thick and gray and heavy with promise. You raise your umbrella again, your old companion, and let it click open with that soft mechanical sigh. You've walked through bazaars and courts and courtyards of parasols, met princes and schoolteachers and collectors of soggy memories, and now it's time to follow the final pages of this strange, sleepy tax story. You're headed to the administrative office where, many years after the system was born, the umbrella tacks quietly, dried up. The building looks like most colonial leftovers chipped columns, faded signs, moss curling up around the windows. You step inside and find it humming with modern noises now. Typing, phone rings, electric fans creaking rhythmically. Overhead. But near the back, behind a file room no one visits, there's a storage shelf labeled simply, Obsolete Civic Goods Forms, Umbrella Files. You open the cabinet. Inside, a final stack of paper. No ceremony. No plaque. Just the lonely remains of a system that once cataloged every canopy above. Calcutta. The umbrella tax began to unravel in the 1940s, not with a protest or a court order, but through sheer administrative exhaustion. A post-war report labeled the entire umbrella classification system as burdensome, revenue inefficient, and disruptive to seasonal morale. Seasonal morale. Historians still chuckle at that phrase. But if you'd spent 3 decades arguing over whether a painted bamboo handle constituted imported ornamentation, you'd probably agree. The rain still came after all, and so did the umbrellas. But fewer people showed up at licensing counters. Inspectors grew tired of chasing villagers through muddy fields to ask for proof of dryness. The ledgers, once neat and precise, became half-filled, then blank. People stopped paying. Officials stopped asking. And the system began to dissolve. One file still tagged with a rusty paperclip contains letters from clerks complaining of form fatigue. The umbrella section receives daily inquiries about receipt ink, handle varnish, canopy thread count. We no longer have the staff. Also, Monsoon Uncle refuses to comply. Yes, he's back. Monsoon Uncle. Still circulating umbrellas like rations in a storm. Still charming the city's wettest citizens into ignoring the law by being so convenient. By 1946, the Colonial administration quietly struck the umbrella tax from the civic goods registry. No grand announcement. No parade. Just a short notice posted near the courthouse. Effective immediately, umbrella taxation will cease in all provinces. Any existing licenses are considered null. Citizens are free to carry shade, without restriction. And that was that. You lean against a filing cabinet, trying to imagine what it must have felt like to walk into the monsoon for the first time in years, without a folded slip of paper in your pocket. No permit, no tag, no worry that a bored constable might decide your canopy was too continental or excessively reflective. Just you, the rain, and the gentle SHFF chef of a cloth canopy unfurling overhead. Still, not everyone was thrilled. There's a letter pinned inside the file cabinet from a magistrate in Allahabad. With the collapse of umbrella taxation, citizens are now free to carry any manner of shade device without scrutiny. This may cause stylistic chaos and unregulated tilt angles. I protest. And in a particularly soggy corner of the file room, you find a single-page protest signed by the last remaining umbrella grading officer in Bombay. It simply reads, "Spent 21 years learning canopy arc assessment, and for what?" But the rain, as always, moved on. In the years after independence, umbrella production blossomed across India. Factories in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Punjab churned out sturdy, colorful, tax-free models for every monsoon, wedding, and tea break. The old inspection stamps faded. The permit forms curled up and turned to mulch in forgotten drawers. Yet something of the system lingered. You wander into a nearby marketplace where modern umbrellas now line the racks. Some are branded, some are collapsible. One even plays music through a Bluetooth speaker in the handle. But in a dusty corner stall, a man sells hand-sewn canopies with little cloth tags sewn inside. They don't say anything legal, just funny. Sayings: no tag, no problem. Officially dry since 1947. This umbrella paid no taxes, but I still respect it. And some tags are left blank, just fabric reminders of the long shadow cast by an empire of receipts and rainfall. Sit down beside a chaiwala and watch the streets shimmer with puddles. Umbrellas spin and glide by like lazy satellites. There's no one checking tags anymore. No one finding school teachers or counting canopy stitches. Just the steady, forgiving rhythm of the monsoon and the soft, private relief of being dry. Maybe. It wasn't the most important tax ever imposed. Maybe it didn't shape armies or rewrite maps. But for a while, the umbrella tax shaped daily life with all its ridiculous details, creative workarounds, and soggy little dramas. And when it ended quietly, like a storm moving on, it left behind more than forgotten forms. It left stories. The city is winding down now. The rain has returned, but not in sheets or slaps. No, this is the kind of drizzle that feels like an afterthought, a whisper. The umbrellas are fewer now, not because it's dry, but because the people are settling in. Shopkeepers tug down shutters. Lamps flicker on behind curtains. Somewhere, a kettle whistles softly. You're walking once more through the old parts of town, following a narrow lane where the walls lean a little too close and every step splashes gently against the stone. The scent of soaked earth rises from the ground like incense. And up ahead, a row of street vendors slowly begins packing away their goods, folding tarps, and yes, shaking out their umbrellas. They do it with a quiet rhythm, a shared choreography, as if they've done this every night for 100 years. And maybe, in a way, they have. This was once the beating heart of umbrella regulation. Right here, in these exact lanes, people once paid too honest to shield themselves from the sky. Here, forms were filled, inspectors wandered, tags were tied, and villagers bargained over what counted as foreign cloth. Here, umbrellas were more than tools. They were identities. And now? The stalls close, and not a single official asks for proof of anything. You pass a small barber shack, closed now but still lit inside. Through the window, you see an old black and white photograph taped to the mirror, a man in a waistcoat, holding an umbrella with a tax tag fluttering near the handle. On the back of the photo, someone has scrawled, "First umbrella in the family. Paid full tax. Regretted nothing." Further down, a spice merchant has pinned to his awning a laminated sign that reads, "Monsoon Safe Zone, no permit needed." And around the corner, a boy draws spirals in the wet ground with a stick. He looks up as you pass and holds up a miniature paper umbrella he's made from newspaper and twine. "Yours have tags?" he asks, half joking, half curious. You grin. "Not anymore." The boy nods, satisfied. Good. Rain doesn't like paperwork. Historians somewhere, far from this puddled lane, still puzzle over the finer points. Was umbrella taxation an economic measure? A symbolic gesture of control? A colonial joke that no one knew when to stop laughing at? But here now, as a gentle wind lifts your umbrella slightly and the mist kisses your cheeks, it doesn't matter. What matters is the soft hush of the city going to sleep. The knowing smiles of people who once shared one umbrella between three. The quiet dignity of shade claimed without permission. And maybe that's what lingers most from this whole DAMP tale, not the absurdity of the tax, but the intimacy of resistance. The way people kept walking, kept sharing, kept drying off under patched cloth and banana leaves and goat-stored silk. Not because they were trying to make history, but because it was raining. And now, as you close your eyes and the storm outside fades to nothing but memory, let the streets of old Calcutta melt away behind your thoughts. Imagine the slow rhythm of footsteps on stone, the soft swish of saris and puddles, the low whistle of wind through umbrella ribs. There's no rush. The forms have been filed. The tax is forgotten. There's no inspector waiting. No receipt to be shown. Just the hush of nightfall settling over a world that once tried to measure the sky and then simply gave up. Let your breath slow. Feel the weight of the day roll off your shoulders like rain sliding from a canopy. Picture yourself walking slowly beneath a wide, quiet umbrella. You can hear it now, the gentle pat of droplets on cloth, like fingers drumming a lullaby. You're dry, you're safe, and no one's asking questions. Maybe. Just before sleep takes you, you pass one last shop, closing up for the night. The vendor smiles and nods, lifts an umbrella from the hook and twirls it once in the air. It's patched, it's crooked, and it's perfect. You tip your head back. Let the cool mist touch your cheeks. And finally, after a long, peculiar journey through monsoon-soaked bureaucracy, you let the night carry you gently, like a dry canopy in the rain.